Okay, I think we're live, Tom. So thanks for joining me this morning. And maybe to start, I know you've had a storied career with Hasbro Interactive, um, and maybe we can start from the beginning. I mean, is that where you started your career at Hasbro, or how did you work your way up to running such a big and well-known company?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Connor, thank you so much for inviting me for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. My career really comes down to three different phases. The first was Parker Brother Games, the second was Hasbro, and the third as an entrepreneur is Dusenberry Entertainment. So
Hmm.
I started my career on the loading dock of Parker Brother Games in Des Moines, Iowa. And then 22 years later, I was running the company. So I've got a lot of experience in trying to go from the bottom to the top. And then
Hmm.
when I was at Hasbro, my focus primarily was on innovation and creativity initially, and then I focused on building a business, and that was Hasbro Interactive. And then from that, I created Dusenberry Entertainment, where it was very much focused on business development and creating new innovation for the marketplace.
Very nice. So can we go all the way back to Parker Brothers Games and why did you choose this certain path, or did it kind of choose you? Why games and entertainment?
I was, a kid just trying to find a job, and but I had a passion for games, and uniquely where I was growing up, which was Des Moines, Iowa, Parker Brothers had a manufacturing facility there. So one of my friend's mothers worked there, and I asked her if she could get me an interview, and I got an interview. So that's how I started in the game business. But
Hmm.
amazingly, Connor, when I started in the game business, it was a $50 million business, and it was primarily driven by board games that you could buy for $1.99 or $2.99. And
Hmm.
the big part of my career was the fact that I caught this industry when it just absolutely exploded. And so today, the game industry is over $200 billion, and I was able to kind of draft off that success as I went forward in my career.
And can you define the game industry, right? I know we're talking about board games, but I know it's much more digital now, correct? It's all video
Right,
games
right.
or
The way I define the game business and what I compete in is the macro game business. And so basically it's driven by four segments. The biggest segment is mobile games, and then the second biggest segment is video games, and then the third biggest segment is PC games, and then there's all other, which includes board games and card games.
so can you maybe speak to the transition of when it became more digital? Because it looks like you've had quite a long career, I think, beginning all the way back in the 70s at Hasbro. So what was that transition like as computers became more mainstream and shifting from that board game to video games?
Yeah. So uniquely, it was a very fortunate thing for me, but Parker Brothers was purchased by General Mills, so we became part of a big
Mm.
company. And
Hmm.
Atari came along, and General Mills was looking for rapid growth. And so we moved from being just a classic board game business to becoming an interactive game business. And Parker Brothers at the time became the biggest third-party publisher of games. And so we had Frogger and Hubert and Popeye and Star Wars and many other games that were in the marketplace. And so that was what I call the video games 1.0. And then when I got to Hasbro Interactive, it was video games 2.0, which I really brought it forward even further.
And what would you say is video games 3.0? Or maybe we can talk a little bit about like the current state of the game industry and the big gaming and where you think it's heading.
Well, I think that right now it's it's like the promised land for games from a point of view that the game industry is so mature and so sophisticated right now that from an innovator's point of view, you can build a game for the mobile market and you can bring it into the marketplace for $1 or $2 million versus if you're trying to do a AAA game such as League of Legends or Call of Duty, those companies are investing easily $1 billion before they get a penny back. So there's a
Mm.
wide variety of different choices that you can make as it relates to the games that you want to bring to the marketplace.
That's a relatively high barrier to entry, right? Even if you say, okay, you want to create the next big mobile game and it's $1 million. If you're, say, just a software developer or game developer, it sounds like you still need to bring on investment to participate in the industry.
Well, I don't. The game industry is really not for the faint of heart, from a point of view that it does take a certain amount of money to be able to develop the game. But probably more importantly is that the issue is to find a customer. So customer
Hmm.
acquisition is very, very key. So in today's market, when I'm looking at a mobile game, there's really two key things, and that is that what is the game and is it fun? And then what market or what audience is it trying to attract, and will it be able to attract that audience from a point of view that they want to come and play it and then stay with it from a retained point of view to be able to make it worthwhile from a monetization perspective.
Yeah, and I'm kind of thinking you brought up Call of Duty earlier, and I played Call of Duty growing up, but at this point, it seems as though they just recreate something that's very similar over and over again. Is that a specific strategy, or is that, hey, this works, let's just continue to monetize and cash in on it?
Well, sadly, at least from my point of view, is that out of the top 100 games, 98 of them are franchises. So they're Call of Duty or they're League of Legends or they're Harry Potter or something else that's recognizable. And
Hmm.
today, versus even 10 years ago, where publishers were bringing out new products all the time, today the publishers do not bring out so many new products. And what they do is they want to bring out new versions of existing products for one reason.
Hmm.
That is, it takes so much time and energy to build an audience. If you have an audience, you want to continue to feed that audience with new content and keep them in your universe because that's who you're making money off of.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think it's pretty parallel. You think of the Marvel movies, and it's just keep pumping out superhero movies. So I imagine it's very similar. So maybe if we could pivot back really quickly, I'm curious again, going back to, okay, you started at Parker Brother Games, but what is it like, or what do you lend your success to as you climb the ladder? Is it just continuing to learn and grow and staying with the same company, or how do you rise all the way up to becoming the CEO of Hasbro Interactive?
Well, I think the probably the most important thing is to respect other people, and that is that whether they're a peer, a subordinate, or a superior, always have respect for them. And I also think that it's very, very important for you to be able to try to separate yourself from others from a point of view of the projects you're doing. So with me, I had a really good work ethic, and I could kind of outwork other people from a point of view of getting things done. And I think
Mhm.
that was really a big value at the very beginning. But I also learned that change is really good from a point of view of organizational dynamic. And you can almost go back in my career and say, how did you move from manufacturing to sales? How did you move from sales to marketing? How did you move from marketing to innovation? Each one of those really came with either a change in management or the company changed hands and someone else had purchased it. So what I found was that many people, whenever they see that there's certain uncertainty and change, they fear it and they try to run from it. And what I did, instead of running from it, I ran to it and I embraced the fact that there was going to be change. And what I find was is that whenever a new management came in or a new company came in, it was a chance for me to reinvent myself and to
Mhm.
reestablish who I was at that point, and then to be able to go forward. So I really encourage people that stay within a specific business to embrace change, and when change happens, try to change with it from a point of view of improving and increasing your responsibilities from a career perspective.
And would you say that well-rounded approach, it sounds like you worked in many different areas of the business, gave you that understanding of the business as a whole, and then that allowed you to move into the CEO position? Is that a big part of it?
I think for me, it was huge because I knew every phase of the business intimately because I had worked in each of those different phases of the business. And so each was like a stepping stone to be able to prepare for the next step. And so once I got to the ultimate job of being the CEO and have full responsibility, I was very confident in my ability to talk with marketing, to talk with product development, to talk with sales, to talk with finance, because I had all those disciplines and understood exactly what the pressures were that they were dealing with to be able to maximize whatever the business opportunity was.
Very cool. And can you speak to what it's like to be a CEO? Because I think I have a general understanding, right? Or I see the CEO for the company that I work out, and I just know that you're very busy, right? Like you said, you have all those operational areas under you. So what is it like, maybe a day in the life, or how do you juggle all that responsibility?
Well, from a point of view of your ultimate responsibility, it's a financial responsibility, and that is that you have committed to a plan and you want to make that plan happen. But after that, I mean, what really comes down to the CEO's primary job is to put the right people in place, make sure the people are trained properly, and the people are maximizing what their opportunity is. So for me as a CEO, I would spend a lot of time with each of the different departments and make sure that they understood how critical they were to the overall success of the business and what impact that their decisions were making on the overall part of the business. And the better the communication you could have with each of the different departments and letting them understand from a stakeholder perspective what the overall mission was, the more viable it was to be able to be successful from a company-wide perspective.
Yeah, and I think if you bring up a good point, I think it's probably one of the most difficult things is hiring the right talent. So is there any strategy you utilize specifically to ensure that you had the right people in the right places?
Well, I think that for me, you need to kind of, just as a CEO, you need to know what you're good at, but you need to also accept the fact that you need help in specific areas. So probably the most important reason I was successful was that I hired a gentleman named Tony Parks, who was my product development guy.
Hmm.
Tony and I were exceedingly compatible from a point of view that I was this big picture guy and I was this big marketing guy, and I like to make the business happen. And Tony was as solid as they came from a point of view of understanding of technology and understanding of the development principles and policies to be able to make successful product happen. So Tony would always say to me, I never want to limit your thinking and your creativity. My job is to find a way to meet that success. So that's where he always understood where he was coming from. But
Hmm.
probably equally important is that in a $300 million business, he had an $80 million budget. So most of the money was being spent on content development, and
Hmm.
he took that exceedingly serious from a point of view of who the right team was to be able to get in place. But equally important was that from his point of view, not making a product happen on time was the worst possible thing. So he focused like a laser beam to be able to make that happen. And the ultimate compatibility came down to what I felt about this one individual was that he had the breadth to be able to handle a $80 million budget, but he also had the depth to be able to go down to, when necessary, to program for 36 straight hours to be able to get a product to the point that it was commercially viable to go into the marketplace. So there was an
Wow.
example of somebody that was really good at something that I just didn't have a lot of expertise in, and the compatibility worked really well. And the same thing, you just mentioned, I'm a really good marketing guy, but I really never worked in an advertising agency. So from the
Hmm.
guy that ran my marketing team, he was an advertiser, because that was the second biggest bucket that we spent from a point of view of money, was that, to make the product happen. So I needed
Hmm.
to have compatible skills on that side that, understood how to be able to maximize that message in a 30-second period of time, and how to maximize the media purchases to be able to spend your money properly to make all the sales happen. So I think the
Hmm.
CEO has to have a certain amount of self-confidence in himself to be able to hire people that are much better than he is in a certain position to be able to make the overall team better.
I think that makes sense. And maybe you can go into a little more depth about how you found Tony. Was he already an internal person at Hasbro that you promoted, or did you have to go out and find him outside of the company? And then did you really have to sell him on joining you? What was that process like?
All of the above. I had internal development people that were really good at doing really traditional type of stuff. My vision was to go well beyond what our capabilities were. So I knew instinctually that I needed to hire somebody that was compatible with me. But I also knew that if I went to a headhunter, I would get a whole bunch of different people that would be talking heads. I had a very close associate, his name is Steve Meyer, who was a very solid interactive entertainment executive. And I reached out to him and I said, told him what my situation was. And he then came back to me and said, I have one recommendation for you. That's this guy named Tony Parks. And the reason that Tony was so compatible was that he was with a company called Microprose, which was the Civilization franchise. And at the time, it was a huge franchise and very complicated technology to make simple type of moves happen. So I love that about Tony, that he worked with Sid Meier, who was a legend in the marketplace, and understood, the creative process and how to maximize it from a development point of view. But
Mhm.
Tony also was technology sound because his background behind the games business was is that he did banking and financial security protection.
Mhm.
So I mean, he just knew technology better than anybody else. So when it came right down to it, I really needed to convince him to be able to join my company. And when I learned about him, he was more than just a business guy. He was a really talented human being on many different levels. And what was the center of his life was his family. And so what it would to be able to solidify the opportunity, I asked he and his wife to come up. My wife and he and his wife got together, and we really got along well. And there was a great compatibility there. So I think that there was a confidence on my side, but more importantly, there was a confidence on his side that there was a compatibility. And then he made the ultimate decision to move up here and to be a part of our company.
Yeah. No, I bet it felt good when you had him on board or once you realized that you made the right hire, right? So, um, outside of that, so hiring is very important as a CEO. What other traits or qualities are important to be a successful CEO? Maybe the top three.
Well, I think that, strategy is absolutely critical. You've got to be
Hmm.
able to not only have a strategy, but you've got to be able to articulate it both to your company and to your broader stakeholders, whether it's Wall Street or whoever else it is. And
Hmm.
to me, I'm a ultimate strategist. I'd really like to pay attention to strategy. I think that it's really important. And, if you plan your work and work your plan, it can be very successful for everybody involved. So I do think that the CEO is the guy that is that mission driven guy that has got to make sure that the strategy is in place and that everybody understands what the strategy is and that we're all going after the same goal. So that to me would be number one. And, and then in addition to that, probably the most important thing is to pay attention to finance. And that is that, you've got a certain amount of capital you can spend. Are you spending that capital against what your strategy is to be able to fulfill what the mission is? Um, and so that's critical. And then, of course, talent. It's always talent. You've got to
Hmm.
find and identify and keep the proper talent.
So, are you able to speak to your strategy, or maybe you can think about it when you took over as CEO and you said, okay, where am I going to steer the ship? Where are we going? Are you able to talk through that?
Yeah. So this is a long time ago, but
Hmm.
when when we first started, Hasbro had done a lot of different software initiatives. So International was doing some product, the toy people were doing some product, and the game people were doing some product. So the strategy to create the company, and it actually held together for the entire period of time, really came down to three very major initiatives. One was to take the Hasbro brands and to be able to extend them into international into interactive. So, you're talking about Monopoly and Transformers and Scrabble and G.I. Joe, and how could we take those, great franchises and bring them into the interactive entertainment world? So that was strategy number one. Then strategy number two was that we had an advantage over the other interactive companies because of the fact we were part of Hasbro. So the second strategy was to execute against licenses. So it gave us an opportunity to go after like Star Wars and Small Soldier and Nickelodeon and Disney.
Hmm.
And so that was a really important part of the strategy as well. And then the third part of the strategy, which was the one that was like the huge growth driver, was original content. And that was that we felt that innovation and creativity was really central to our company and to being able to be successful. So on the create on the original side, we on our very second try, we hit a grand slam with RollerCoaster Tycoon. And
Hmm.
it came out of the chute and it was $100 million business right off the bat. So that original strategy really worked for us. But in addition to that, we also looked at the fact that Hasbro was a good toy company and we were a good software company, and what could we do to bring those two things together? So part of the strategy was to create the smart toy category, and so we did that with what we call the CD-ROM play sets, and so that
Hmm.
executed as well. So a strategy of extending brands, licenses, and original content all deployed very effectively in that strategy.
Yeah, so I remember Roller Coaster Tycoon is something I played growing up. So I agree, it was a great game. Can you maybe speak to what it was like to develop that idea, or how the idea came about and how you bring that into reality?
Well, the guy that gets all the credit is Chris Sawyer because he was the developer of the game, and he was had a very clear vision as far as what he wanted to accomplish, and so when Tycoon came in, it was called White Knuckle, and so that was the name of the product. And during that period of time, we had just purchased the Microprose business, and part of the Microprose business was not only Civilization, but they also had many other great properties, including Railroad Tycoon. And
Mm,
Railroad Tycoon was kind of like a role play strategy game, so it had a kind of a following with it. So when we were looking at White Knuckle, we decided that thought we needed to go after a broader audience and have a more impactful name. So we came up with the amusement park positioning of what's the most exciting thing in an amusement park, and that's the roller coaster. And then what
mm.
we do to tie in that role play strategy player into this game so they understand that it's a resource management role play type of a game. And so that's where we put roller coaster and tycoon together, and that became roller coaster tycoon. And then from a development point of view, Chris Sawyer was from the UK. He was represented by Jackie Lyons, who was a agent. And what Chris really wanted to do was that he had a clear vision for the product, and it was a real challenge from a CEO point of view. But what Chris wanted was one, he wanted an 18% royalty, which was unheard of at the time.
Hmm.
And he wanted no advances or anything else. He would take the entire risk himself from a point of view of developing the product. And then his second request or demand was that he didn't want any interference from Hasbro. He had a clear vision, and he felt that he needed to deliver the game that he needed to deliver. So we agreed to those two terms, and so we came forward, and fortunately, he developed a very, very good game that was quite successful in the marketplace. And then we supported him with the proper publishing and marketing skills to be able to make it the success it is today.
Very cool. And does Roller Coaster Tycoon still exist today? Are
Very
there?
much. Yeah, it's it's interesting because you hear about the name Atari and the Atari publishing, and you would think about Missile Command and Tetris and those types of games, but the biggest game by far in the Atari franchise is Roller Coaster Tycoon, and they purchased that when we dissolved our business. They got that asset. So Roller Coaster Tycoon continues to flourish in the marketplace, and it's primarily driven by a mobile game today.
Okay. I'll have to check it out. That's very interesting. And another thing I want to kind of shift to, right, is branding. I think when I think about Roller Coaster Tycoon and some of the other brands that you've talked about, I would imagine that was a key to success as well as developing strong brands. So maybe if you could speak to strategy around that, or for anybody listening, what is brand and how do you develop a strong brand?
Yeah, well, using Monopoly as an example, when I first started working with Monopoly, it was a 2D flat board game, and it had the brand recognition was Monopoly. And when we started to look at it, and we started to say, it should be more than just a flat 2D board game. What can we do to create a brand? And so the first thing we did was we brought Rich Uncle Pennybags out of the box, and we made him prominent in the logo himself. So in the O of Monopoly, Rich Uncle
Hmm.
Pennybags bursts out to you, and now all of
Hmm.
a sudden there's a character that's developed. So to me, that was really the beginning of what our branding repositioning was. But then what we did was we pursued like markets. So we did an interactive entertainment game. We did the Monopoly McDonald's promotion. We did a TV show. And what we did was is that we kind of reinvented Monopoly in front of the world from a point of view of the proposition was traditional board game, but it could be so much more than a traditional board game with all these different venues and outlets that it has.
Hmm. Okay, so it's expanding. It's taking maybe one way to do it is taking something that exists and expanding it into different channels, and so it sits more prominent in the customer's mind and their perception of the brand.
Yeah, and I would use the word reinterpretation.
Interpretation. Okay. What And then maybe we can shift to, or do you think of yourself as having a personal brand? And is there any advice you can give someone that is out there that's trying to develop a personal brand? What's the key there?
Well, because I've been around for so long, I do have a brand. It's a very narrow brand because it's only in the game industry. But I think that what's most important is that you have a good reputation, And a lot of
Mm,
times, if you find somebody that moves around from industry to industry and company to company, they might have had some problems in the past, and that's why they had to do that. So if you find somebody that's kind of in the same industry for a long period of time, they must have a fairly good reputation because they've been able to survive for all that period of time. And, I
mm,
always also think that no matter what the circumstance is, you need to be kind. And
mm-hmm,
so, when you walk into a room, it doesn't matter if it's the chairman of the company or if it's somebody that's an intern. You should treat them with respect and dignity. And if you do, it'll pay off later on. And for me, because I had so much exposure in my career with so many different opportunities, I have people coming up to me now saying, "I met you 30 years ago. I met you 20 years ago. I met you 10 years ago." And I have no clue who they are, but they have a fond memory of me because of some interaction that we had a long time ago. And that
mm-hmm.
to me is kind of fulfilling. It's like, geez, maybe I was a fairly decent person during that period of time and I left a positive impression on people.
No, I think that's a good point, right? I think you really only have one reputation or one first impression. So, um, can we shift to, I think you mentioned earlier that Hasbro Interactive was dissolved. Did I understand that correctly? Or maybe you can talk to to kind of the twilight of your career there and then pivoting to Dusenberry Entertainment or starting your own venture.
Sure. The When we built Hasbro Interactive, it was a period of time of rapid growth for not only us but Hasbro as well. And during that period of time, they bought Galoob and they bought Kenner and they bought the Super Soaker business, and they became just all over the place. And so the
Mm,
management decided that for them, and to be candid with you, interactive entertainment was a foreign business to the toy and game industry. We had different trade terms, we had different ways that we did accounting, and so it became kind of a challenge from their perspective. And they had all these things spread all over the place. So the top guy decided that he wanted to go what was called back to basics, and that was to be a traditional toy and traditional game company. And that then
mm,
allowed me, and they asked me to do this, to lead the effort to sell Hasbro Interactive, and then I could exit the company. So I very
mm.
successfully sold the company to Infogram and all the assets that went with it. That gave me the exit I was looking for, and then I became Dusenberry Entertainment from that point forward.
Got it. And what's the key to successfully exiting a company or selling a company? I mean, how did you manage that process?
Well, you have to have assets that are valuable. And
Yeah.
we had that, and I think that what you need to do is you need to put together your best possible package as it relates to why you're valuable, and articulate that in a way that others see the value as well.
Okay. And then what is it like negotiating such a big deal? I mean, did you feel you had the leverage?
Sure. The to do a deal like that, a lot of it comes down to holding the deal together. So there's a lot of what about this, what about that? Does that have value? And what you need to do is to be able to push back and make sure that the buyer understands exactly what they're buying, and that you need to maintain what that price point is.
Okay. And then at that point in time, how are you feeling with the exit from Hasbro Interactive? Were you kind of wishing that it was going to stay around so you could continue running the company, or were you ready to transition to something new?
I, uh, I knew that the company needed to separate from Hasbro. We were just too different from the core company. And
Hmm.
so I was happy because I think I was going to protect all my employees, which was kind of like a top goal from my perspective. The
Hmm.
one mistake I feel that I made was that I should have gone out and found the money and purchased it myself. And I just didn't. I was at the stage in my career that I was looking at what the exit was going to be and what it was going to mean to me, and so I was happy with all that. And but in hindsight, now that I've looked at it after a 20-year period of time, it's like shit. I should have gone back and I should have probably purchased it. Gone out and got some equity money.
Are you able to share how much it was worth or the deal or what you would have had to buy it for if you would have bought it?
Infoground bought it for $275 million.
Okay. And so what would the strategy have been from your perspective that you'd have to go out and find investors to go in with you to purchase it?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So I guess that didn't happen, right? But you were able to then pivot to do some Berry entertainment. I mean, did you know that you were going to do that prior to selling the company? You kind of already had that in mind, or was it you sold the company and you said, hey, I need to figure out what's next?
I had received a opportunity of a lifetime about a year earlier and announced to Hasbro that I was resigning from the company. And
Mm,
they pushed back and gave me even a better deal to stay. So at that stage, I'm now committed to Hasbro. But I also was wanting to move forward into the marketplace more aggressive than Hasbro wanted to from a mobile game perspective. So,
hmm.
from my point of view, once the company was successfully moved out of Hasbro and into Infogram, it gave me an opportunity to hire the best of the best from Hasbro and to create a new company that was completely focused on one area, and that was mobile games.
Okay, so Dusenberry Entertainment is a mobile game development company. Is that a fair?
So Dusenberry Entertainment is a company that has been around for 20 years, and it's a like an umbrella company that handles my projects, my patents, my business deals, and things like that. And then there's during that period of time, I have worked with many different companies and built other companies in addition to Dusenberry Entertainment. So during that period of time, from the year 2000 to the year 2010, I actually built and sold four mobile game companies that had different names and things like that, and they were all part of a roll up going forward. And all those companies are now with EA Sports, or excuse me, EA Mobile.
What were those games that you built and sold
So
to
like
EA?
so when I left Hasbro Interactive, I hired Tony Parks. He and I joined
Okay.
forces, and we created a company that we named it Call It Entertainment. So it was Call It, for a play on words
Hmm.
from a mobile point of view. And we
Hmm.
went and we got a couple of licenses from Hasbro, and we got a couple of licenses like Slingo, and we got Poker Superstars and we were able to create a business. And then after 3 years, we rolled up with it, and that was all based upon J2ME type projects. And so we found a company that was doing brew products, which was the competitor from a platform point of view, and we rolled
Hmm.
ourselves together. So we now have brew and J2ME products. That then rolled up into a bigger play, which was a West Coast company that had like the Da Vinci Code and Slingo and some other brands which
Hmm.
then led to rolling up into Glue, which then rolled into EA Sports or EA Mobile.
Okay. Yeah. From my perspective, seems a little complex, but it sounds like it was a successful exit for you.
It was
Or
it wasn't complex. It was just it was fast moving, and that was
okay.
we went from J2 and me to wanting Brew, so we put two companies together, and then we needed
Hmm.
more muscle as it relates to what we were doing with our distribution partner. So then we rolled in with a bigger company in California. And
Hmm.
then I went from being a CEO to a CEO advisor, and then the CEO
Hmm.
and I are good buddies, and then he sold the business to Glue.
Got it. And what is the focus currently on for Dusenberry Entertainment? What are you working on at the moment?
Yeah, I've got two major projects that I just can't talk about because of confidentiality. But in addition to that, I can do a lot of licensing. So I use my contacts and relationships. So I work with innovators, and we come up with new innovation, and then we sell that to big companies such as publishers and toy companies.
Okay. So I guess we'll, yeah, have to wait and see, right? Is there any sort of timeline on or announcements around the new
It's
project?
within the next year. I've been working on both of these projects for a couple of years now, so they're baking and they're ready to be launched.
And I'm curious too, kind of the structure of Dusenberry Entertainment. Do you have employees underneath you, or are you working with more people? I know you brought up Tony Parks again on a consultative basis. I mean, how is the company structured?
Yeah, I'm a I work by myself, but then I work with collaborators. So I
Got it.
either use contractors or I use innovators, and I position myself as a one-stop solution, and that is that I can just about solve any question you have from a toy or game point of view. And if you have great skills, let's use those great skills. But if you need support to be able to make the rest of the business happen, I have the access to the right people to be able to make that happen for you.
And what do you lend to just being able to build such a strong network? I mean, is it truly just with time and working with different people over time just allowed you to build this, or what do you lend to that strong network you have?
Well, I think that that's a big part of it is, time and grade does pay off for it, but I've been blessed with the fact that I'm the former CEO of Hasbro Interactive and Atari, and
Hmm.
because of that, it opens up almost any door.
Okay. So yeah, if you have that resume behind you, I'm sure that helps a lot.
Right.
And one thing I've noticed with your story is it seems like you kind of went all in on one area. You were focused on just games, mobile games, content. Do you lend that to your success? Is not getting distracted and not saying, "Oh, I want to go try and do this or do that." Um, just something I've noticed through our
Yeah,
interview.
I definitely stay in my lane. I've learned that staying in my lane is the right thing to do, but the lane is very wide. Because I position myself as being active in games from board games and card games all the way up to mixed reality and everything in between.
Hmm.
And so I pretty much stay there. And I've learned over uh, my career that if I leave my lane, I don't do as well. I don't have as many contacts. I don't have as many relationships, and so that's hard. And then I've also found that I'm really good at doing things that are under $100 from a retail point of view. So if all of a sudden you want to do something that's a couple $1,000s, I'm just not as good at it because I'm a real mass market type of a guy. So I like to do things that are mass market focused.
Okay, and that's a good segue into kind of my next question, mass market. Where do you think the gaming industry is headed as we look into the next 10 years into the future? I know that there's kind of a push for virtual reality and Oculus, but I know that hasn't really taken off. Do you expect any major innovation over the next 10 years, let's say?
Well, definitely. The game industry is one thing that it's really good at is creating new genres and new businesses. And it happens all the time. So, I mean, I think 10 years ago, if you and I were talking about the fact that there's competitive video game players that are making a fortune in esports, we would be like crazy, but that's there
Mm-hmm.
and it's really big. I saw a report the other day that said that the interactive game industry is about $180 billion right now, and they're projecting that it's going to triple in size to $540 billion in the next 7 years. And that's driven by streaming. And so that's where you start to see Netflix, Amazon, Facebook, Google. They will be the big players from a game perspective down the road because they've got the streaming capability. So I think that, to me, that's what I see as being the big change in the marketplace over the next decade, and that is the integration of subscription-based streaming type business opportunities for the game market.
And what do you mean by that subscription-based streaming? Is that where someone's paying to watch streamers, right? Like I'm relatively familiar with Twitch, where you can just log in, whoever's playing, and just playing Fortnite, and you can just watch him. So I guess what are you referring to as, or how is that different, or how will
So,
that change in the
so
future?
two things. One is that you'll probably belong to a service, and that's where you'll get access to the content that you want to play over and over. So instead of going
Hmm.
and buying a $60 game, what you'll do is you'll just download a game, and it'll continue to send you new content all the time, and you'll be paying for that to be able to do it.
Hmm.
But what we've also learned is that these games are the stories are so significant, the graphics are so immersive that we find that about half the people like to watch people play games versus people that are just playing games. And so that
Hmm.
again is on the subscription side. And you can kind of see that because why not go watch the best of the best play in a League of Legends type of a tournament? And so that's
Hmm.
where all of a sudden it becomes very important for you to be able to have streaming and to be able to be a part of a community, watching the best of the best playing your games.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't like the issue right now is, let's say you have an Xbox and you want to play, like you mentioned, really high quality graphics, or it's in 4K or whatever. It's very hard to stream that content currently. I mean, isn't, maybe you could speak to, and I don't know, is, are those games still disc based, or you have to download the whole game onto your PlayStation 5, for example? Are we going to get to a point where you don't need to download it, you're just streaming super high quality game right to your TV?
That's certainly the hope, and that's the hope that what the cloud will be able to do is to process just enough ahead of you that you don't have to have the significant downloads.
And what's the timing on that? If you, from your perspective, is that
2 to 5 years.
okay? No, I think that'll be interesting. And then maybe we can transition just maybe a couple questions here, just because I'm curious. Maybe you can provide some advice for the audience. And one question I want to ask is, if you look back to your 18-year-old self when you started your career, what would you tell yourself, or what's the best advice you could give yourself looking back?
Uh, uh, Keep working hard.
Okay, and then simple as that.
Yeah.
And was there anybody that maybe gave you good advice as you were that reminded you to do that as you were growing at Hasbro, or
Yeah,
was there a significant mentor in your life?
I've been blessed with multiple mentors in my life. The two most significant, one, his name is Dave Wilson, and he was an executive at Parker Brothers when I was up and coming. And he always kept an eye on me, and he was always willing to give me advice. And he always had positive reinforcement for me. And he ultimately was with our greatest competitor, Milton Bradley, and yet the relationship that he and I had endured that, and we were always able to. He was always able to help me. And then once I was at the highest levels of the organization, I really learned a great deal from Randy Rissman. And Randy was the founder and the owner of Tiger Electronics, and so
Hmm.
he was the true entrepreneur. And Randy had an ability to be able to see the market and to be able to interpret the market better than anybody else I ever seen. And so I was always would gravitate to Randy because his advice and wisdom always was profound.
Okay. And is there a key to finding a mentor? Is it just approaching someone and showing interest and trying to learn from them, or how does someone find that mentor?
I think that you have to be true to yourself, and then you'll find that there are certain people that are compatible with what you do. And so, like with Dave Wilson, it was an interesting thing on how we connected, and that was that we this was very early in my career, but we had an electronic game called Merlin. And
Hmm.
Merlin was like a giant leap forward for Parker Brothers because it was the first time ever we did a 1999 retail product. So, I mean, it was huge compared to what we had been doing in the past, and it was electronic. And the demand of the product was outstripping what we could produce. And so what happened was that I was asked at a very early stage in my career to go into the senior executive staff meeting, and I would go in for 2 minutes, but my job was to report on what the status was for Merlin. And
Hmm.
so what happened was the manufacturing people went out and they bought a whole bunch of new equipment and a whole bunch of new capabilities so that we could raise our rate of being able to do Merlin at 4,000 a day to 6,000 a day. And so during that process of being able to build that, manufacturing was struggling with being able to get to what they had kept promising. But what I did was is that I hedged the bet, and I would always go into the senior staff meeting, and instead of saying that we're going to make 6,000, I'd say this week we can do 4,400. And so the sales guy would have an accurate number that he would be able to do allocation for to send out to all his different customers. And we're
Hmm.
about a month or 2 months into it, and all of a sudden the manufacturing guy says, "How come you keep reporting those low numbers, Tom, and we think that we can do more?" And Dave Wilson looked at me like, "You mean you've been sandbagging me this whole time?" And I said, "No, I've been giving you numbers that you can live with and that numbers that you will be able to have confidence in." And when we walked out of that room, he came to me and he grabbed me and gave me the biggest hug. And he goes, "You're one smart dude, being able to be one step ahead of me." And that was the beginning of our relationship that's lasted even to today.
Yeah. So it sounds like you provided value, and then that was the key to beginning the relationship and then fostering it,
Right.
which is great.
And I think that
Um,
part of it was also is that you get information, but you need to interpret information. You don't need to just take the information and run with it. And to me, I
mhm.
was hearing one thing, but I was knowing something else was going to happen, and I had the intuition to be able to understand that and to make sure the company ran properly from a point of view that he had the proper allocation. Because there's nothing worse than saying to Toys R Us, "Hey, we're going to give you 2,000 pieces," and you ship them 1,200 pieces, and they go, "What happened to my other product?" Right? And so you
Yeah.
need to be able to manage those expectations all the time.
Okay. No, I think that's great advice. And I want to go back to you mentioned hiring was very important, and then you talked about Tony Parks and other key members of your team. So for someone that is looking to take that next step in their career, get that promotion or stand out, what is the key to getting hired? Or if you think back to all the people you hired and all the interviews, what did people that stood out do the most?
I looked for people that had specific talent for what I was looking for. So, whether they were a sales guy or a marketing guy or a product guy. Uh, and so they had to have the credentials and they had to have some type of track record, right? But
Hmm.
for me, what was really important was I was looking for well-rounded people. And so I would like to spend time with, who's your family?
Mm.
What means the most to you? What do you do from a community point of view? And learning all those types of things about a person really made me understand whether they would fit into what our environment was and how we worked. And so a lot of times, that would be the telling point was that, they might not be that interested in their family or they might not have that good of a family relationship, although they were qualified to be able to do the job. They probably wouldn't fit into what we were doing, so we would hire somebody else.
Okay, so I think it's outside of just the day to day, right? It's the broader person. It's fitting into your culture. So.
Yeah, and I think that that's really critical and being honest to your culture as well. I had a senior VP of sales who was great. He was as good as they came. And his daughter was a college level lacrosse player. And it was the most important thing in the world to him to be able to see his daughter as a senior play her last year from an athletic point of view.
Hmm.
And so instead of having him sneak out of the office, twice a week at 3 o'clock to be able to go see the game, what we did was that we recognized that it was he was going to do, and we celebrated that. And what I mean by
Hmm.
that is that we knew that she was going to be playing against somebody, and we made it really important. So the next day in the staff meeting, we let him tell us what happened. And all of a sudden, even though he was a great pro, he was more committed than ever because it was a sense of family and everybody cared about what his family was doing.
Yeah, yeah, it's paying attention to those little details that he'd say, hey, my boss, the CEO, has a lot of other things going on. He may not pay attention to this, but since he noticed it, I'm sure that did a lot. Okay, well, I think I'll give you the floor to close out here. Are there any last thoughts you'd like to provide to the audience, and then just let people know where they can find you and follow you and see what you're up to and get
Sure,
important updates on launches and everything.
sure. So for me, I've been blessed. I've been, had the great opportunity to work in the same industry for a long period of time, and I've also been blessed because some of the greatest successes the industry's ever seen I've been a part of,
Hmm.
and I always drive from one principle, and that is that it's all about the fun. And what I've really learned is that in the world of games is that you've got to focus like a laser beam on what the consumer experience is and what the fun is. And to me, I not only do that from a game point of view, but I also try to deliver it's all about the fun from a point of view of organizational dynamic, teamwork, and all that type of stuff that's related to that. So I hope that, on my tombstone at the top, it's all about the fun because that's really what I stood
Okay.
for from a career
Hmm.
point of view. And I love to collaborate with people. I love to collaborate with innovators. I work with MIT architects. I work with, all kinds of different types of people. And if you're interested or you have something that you would like me to, collaborate with you on, you can find me at my email at tom@tomdusenberry.com, or you can go to my website, which is dusenberryentertainment.com, and you can find me. And I'd love to learn more about your project, and I'd love to see if we could collaborate together.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you, Tom. And I'll be sure to put your email and your website in the description of the video so people can find you. And hey, I appreciate you taking the time and sharing your message. So wish you the best of luck.
Well, thank you, Connor. I really appreciate it. It was a great time this morning.
All right. Thanks.